Hello, my friends. I hope that you guys are all doing very well. So in today's video, I wanted to give you guys some very actionable exercises. I wanted you guys to not just feel like you're consuming information as we tend to do on YouTube. I want you guys to be able to finish this video and feel like you've actually made moves towards reaching your goal of sounding more like a native speaker of English. So in general, if you've watched my videos before, you'll know that I'm really big on auditory perceptual training. And one way to improve our auditory perceptual skills is quite simply to teach our auditory perceptual system to pick out mistakes. In fact, research within the field of speech-language pathology has shown that even native English-speaking children who have difficulty with speech, it's very often because the auditory representation, literally at the level of their brain, is incorrect. And so if your brain isn't sure what the word should sound like or what sound you should be saying, then how on earth should you expect yourself to say it correctly, right? So I have many videos on my channel that kind of test your auditory perceptual skills. So I'm going to link that for you guys below if after doing this video you want to engage in more similar practice. It's really valuable, even though it may not seem super exciting. But so for today's video, I'm going to be reading you guys a text from Pride and Prejudice. Now, if Pride and Prejudice doesn't interest you at all, that's actually better because I don't want your brain to be super focused on meaning. I, in fact, want you to turn off that part of your brain as much as you can and focus in on pronunciation, right? So you're going to have a hard time focusing on pronunciation if you're really interested in whether Lizzie and Mr. Bingley end up together. So I intentionally chose something A, that didn't have any copyright, so I wouldn't have to worry about that, but B, something that wouldn't necessarily be super interesting to most of you guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read chunks of this text and I'm going to present the actual words for you guys up on the screen. And I'm intentionally going to read some of this incorrectly. So again, your job is to find the words that I'm saying incorrectly. And again, view this exercise as simply feeding your auditory perceptual algorithm with good quality information. So I'm going to stop after each section and I'm going to ask you guys, so how many mistakes did you catch in this section? And if you didn't catch all the mistakes, I encourage you guys to go back and listen again and see if you can catch them all. If you're finding the exercise quite difficult, then go into your YouTube settings, slow down the playback speed, and the task is going to be much easier. And the opposite is true as well. If you find that you're catching them all really easily, then go into your YouTube settings and increase the playback speed, and then the exercise will be more challenging for you guys. So without further ado, here we go. And keep in mind, you guys, this is Pride and Prejudice. It was written in the 1700s. So some of the ideas here will certainly not reflect current times. So take that with a grain of salt. That's not the point of this exercise. So here we go. Chapter 1. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However, little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on this first entering a neighborhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters. All right, you guys, so how many mistakes did you catch in this section? So there were quite a few mistakes in this one. There were actually 8, okay? So the first mistake that I made was on the word truth. So instead of making the oo sound there, I believe I said truth. So oo, it's a moving sound, so not an oo, but really an oo, truth. The next word that I mispronounced was the word man. Typically, I say this word with an a that has some nasality on it from that n, but in the text, I said men, as in the plural of a man. The next word that I mispronounced, I got kind of awkward here. I believe I said fortune, but it would be pronounced fortune, fortune. The next mistake I made had to do with word stress. So instead of saying however, I said however. So Even though this may not seem like a big deal, it's actually very, very important to use correct word stress. So this one, however. The next word that I pronounced incorrectly was the word fixed. Fixed. So instead of saying kst, kst, I said fixed. So I snuck an extra schwa sound in there, which many of my clients do for ed endings. So watch out for those. So the next mistake I made was on the word considered. Considered. So instead of saying it like that, I said considered. So I put the stress on that first syllable and I then changed the sound. Instead of making it a schwa, I made it an ah. The next word I mispronounced was the word property. Property. So instead of making that nice open ah sound on that first syllable, I said property. Property. So a lot of my clients make this mistake. So really be aware of that and try to be mindful that those are two different sounds that both exist in English. So the final mistake that I made was on the word daughters. Daughter. So instead of making that ah sound, I made it an sound, exactly like in the previous word we just looked at. So it's not dudders, it is daughters. All right, you guys. So next section, here we go. My dear Mr. Bennet, said his lady to him one day, have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last? Mr. Bennet replied that he had not. But it is, returned she, for Mrs. Long has just been here, and she told me all about it. Mr. Bennet made no answer. Do you not want to know who has taken it? Cried his wife impatiently. You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it. This was invitation enough. All right, my friends, how many mistakes did I make in this section? So in this section, I made 7 mistakes. So here they are. So first up was on the word one. So this word should have the vowel, but instead of making that vowel, I made it more open like an ah. So it's not one, it's one. The second mistake that I made was that I did not put a th sound on the word Netherfield. So instead of Netherfield, I said Netherfield, with was kind of a mix of an alveolar flap and a D. The next mistake that I made, a lot of my French speakers make this exact mistake. So I didn't say not with an open enough quality to my vowel. I made it too closed, so it sounded like nut instead of not. So again, these are two real words in English, like a nut, like a Brazil nut that I have on my desk back there, or the word not. They have totally different vowel sounds. The next mistake that I made was on the word answer. So similarly to a word we saw earlier, what word was that? Man. This one, same idea. So typically I would say this as an a with a bit of nasality because of that n. However, in this case, I incorrectly said answer. Answer, but it should be answer. The next mistake that I made was on the word impatiently. Impatiently. So instead I said impassionately. And this one can be pretty tricky if your auditory exposure isn't high enough, because it in fact looks like it should be an a sound, right? Because it's spelled with the letter A, but that's just not how we pronounce this one. The next mistake that I made was on the word objection. Objection. So instead of saying it like that, I stressed that first letter O and I made the word objection, but it should be objection. And then the last mistake that I made in this section was on the word enough. Enough. So again, I did my stress backwards. So instead of saying enough, I said enough. Enough. So not only did I flip the stress, I then as a result also put in a different sound. All right, you guys, here's the next section. Why, my dear, you must know, Mrs. Long says that Netherfield is taken by a young man of large fortune from the north of England, that he came down on Monday in a chaise and four to see the place, and was so much delighted with it that he agreed with Mr. Morris immediately, that he is to take possession before Michaelmas, and some of his servants are to be in the house by the end of next week. All right, you guys, actually I had a lot of trouble reading this one. So how many mistakes did I make in this section? So the answer here is 6. So the first mistake that I made may have been too hard to catch, but at the end of the word long, we produce a velar nasal. So I know it's spelled NG, but native speakers aren't typically going to say that G unless they speak with a certain dialect, which happens, but it's not nearly as common as the long pronunciation. So as I was reading it here, I tried to intentionally put in a G sound, which again, typically by most native speakers isn't going to be there. The next mistake that I made was on the word young, young. So that vowel should be an sound, but I made it more open to make it sound like yang, when in fact it should be young. The next mistake that I made was also very subtle, very subtle. So if you guys caught this one, your ears are really, really doing a great job for you. So in the word much, I didn't make the ch sound as an affricate, I made it as a fricative. So basically for this word, you have to fully stop your air before releasing it abruptly on that ch, but I made the air keep on flowing. So I actually said mush instead of much, but again, I say it's really hard to hear because I was speaking fairly quickly, so it might have just been difficult to pick up on this one. The next mistake that I made was on the word immediately. Immediately. So I almost said it perfectly, but the sound on that winning syllable, I didn't make it an E, I made it an A. So I said immediately, but the word is pronounced immediately. The next mistake that I made was possession. Possession. So instead of saying it with schwa and then winner, I made that first letter O the winner and I put an aw sound there. So I said possession, but I should have said possession. And then the final mistake in this section was on the word servants. So you can hear I have the strongest syllable and then vince with a schwa. And I said something like servants or servants. I don't quite remember now, but I made a mistake on that second syllable. All right, you guys, next section's a little bit shorter. Here we go. What is his name? Bingley. Is he married or single? Oh, single, my dear, to be sure. A single man of large fortune. 4,000 or 5,000 a year. What a fine thing for our girls. How so? How can it affect them? My dear Mr. Bennet, replied his wife, how can you be so tiresome? You must know that I am thinking of his marrying one of them. All right, you guys, how many mistakes did I make in this section? So only 4 here. So my first mistake was on the word married. So this is a complex R vowel that sounds like air. However, instead of saying that, I said married. Married should have been married. The next mistake that I made was on the word thousand. So instead of putting in a TH there, I just made it a really aspirated T. So I said thousand instead of thousand. The next mistake that I made was on the word affect. Affect. So here, instead of making it schwa winner, I put that stress on that first syllable and I made it an a sound. So I said affect, but I should have said effect. And then the final mistake in this section was on the word must. So this word has the sound, but I made it more open to sound like must instead of must. All right, you guys, next section is another short one. Here we go. Is that his design in settling here? Design? Nonsense. How can you talk so? But it is very likely that he may fall in love with one of them, and therefore you must visit him as soon as he comes. All right, you guys, how many mistakes did you catch here? So there were 4 again. So the first mistake that I made was on the word design. So instead of saying design, I said design. So I flipped my stress and I changed the sounds as well. You'll notice that it was the second time I said design. The first one I said correctly. The next word that I said incorrectly was the word nonsense. So this word has a nice open ah sound, but I made it sound like o. So I said nonsense, but I should have said nonsense. The third mistake that I made was on the word love. Love. So love has the sound. However, I made it too open, so it sounded like love instead of love. And then the fourth mistake I made was actually the exact same idea. So it was on the final word in this paragraph. It was on the word comes. So again, it's that sound, but again, I made it too open. So I made it sound like coms instead of comes. Next section, you guys, here we go. I see no occasion for that. You and the girls may go, or you may send them by themselves, which perhaps will be still better. For as you are as handsome as any of them, Mr. Bingley may like you the best of the party. All right, you guys, so how many mistakes did you catch in this section? So in this section, there were 4 mistakes. So the first one was the word occasion. Occasion. So as you can hear, the first syllable is a schwa, and then the second syllable is stressed. However, I did it in reverse, so I stressed that first letter O. I honestly don't remember whether I said occasion or occasion, but both of those are incorrect. It should be occasion. The second mistake that I made was on the word still. So instead of making that vowel really lax, I made it tense. So it sounded like the verb to steal something, like to take something that's not yours, instead of still, as would fit in this context. The next mistake that I made was on the word handsome. So this is like the other ones we saw earlier, like in the word man, for example. So this is a nasalized a sound. However, that's not how I said it when I read it. I said handsome with an e sound. And then finally, the last mistake that I made in this section was on the word any. Instead of any with an e, I said Annie, like the movie Annie. All right, you guys, next section, here we go. My dear, you flatter me. I certainly have had my share of beauty, but I do not pretend to be anything extraordinary now. When a woman has 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to give over thinking of her own beauty. In such cases, a woman has not often much beauty to think of. But my dear, you must indeed go and see Mr. Bingley when he comes into the neighborhood. All right, you guys, how many mistakes were in this section? There were 5. So the first one was on the word flatter. So this has a tense a sound, but instead of flatter, I said fletter with a different sound. The next mistake that I made was on the word daughters. So instead of putting in that aw sound, I did exactly what I did earlier. So if you missed it last time, I hope you caught it this time. I said daughters with an but it should have been an ah. The next mistake that I made was on the word beauty. So this one might have been easier to catch because I had already said beauty earlier correctly, but I didn't put an e sound at the end of the word. So I said beauty, but we actually can't have a word of English finishing with that lax I sound. So it's not beauty, it's beauty. The next mistake that I made was on the word of, and this is one that a lot of my clients say incorrectly. So the spelling is just very, very misleading. So it looks like OF, obviously it is OF, that's what it's spelled like, but we don't say uff, we say of. So here I intentionally put in a voiceless f sound, but I should have been voicing and made of the V sound. And then the final mistake that I made in this section was on the word neighborhood. So that final syllable, the vowel there should be an a lax sound, but I made it a tense u. So I said neighborhood, but I should have said neighborhood. All right, you guys, next section, here we go. It is more than I engaged for, I assure you. But consider your daughters. Only think what an establishment it would be for one of them. Sir William and Laddie Lucas are determined to go, merely on that account, for in general, you know, they visit no newcomers. Indeed, you must go, for it will be impossible for us to visit him if you do not. All right, you guys, how many mistakes did you catch in this section? So here there were 6 mistakes. So the first mistake was on the word assure. The next mistake that I made is sneaky. So if you caught it, amazing job. So instead of saying but, I said bud. So these are obviously very, very similar, and there's not actually a huge difference in that D or T if it's not being released. So you would know whether the word was but or bud, obviously by the context, but if we're looking at the word in isolation, it's because of the length of that vowel So listen to the difference in length when I say but, bud, but, bud. If that doesn't sound super different to you, it means that you could benefit from further auditory training, but native speakers would pick up on this immediately. If you're thinking, how on earth can I get my brain to pick up on this subtle difference? I made a video a few months ago now, and honestly, I think it's the best video I've ever made, and it was about how to understand fast English. However, there are many other applications to this video because it really teaches you a really research-based method of how you can improve your auditory perceptual skills. And of my clients that have actually followed through with this, as well as some of my viewers that have done this and written to me in the comments, the results can be truly profound. So if you guys are super serious about sounding like a native speaker and you want your brain to pick up on a subtlety like but, bud, the difference in length, for example, then I'm going to link that video for you guys below. And I strongly encourage you to not just watch it, but to actually follow through with the exercise. All right, but back to work. So our next mistake was on the word establishment. Establishment. So in this word, the stress should be on the a sound, but I said establishment or establishment. I don't remember what sound I threw in there, but the stress should be on that a sound. So the next mistake that I made was on the word lady. Lady. And instead of lady, I said laddie. So this one isn't that crazy, right? Like lady is spelled with the letter A, so it's conceivable that it could be pronounced with an a sound, but it's not. It's pronounced with the A sound. So Lady Lucas. The next mistake that I made was sneaky, 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 and a lot of my clients get this wrong. So the word was merely, merely, but instead of making the ear sound, I made an air sound. So I said merely instead of merely. So again, how I pronounced it was actually much more reasonable based on the spelling. However, that's just not how English works, and we don't say merely, we say merely. And then the last mistake that I made in this section was on the word impossible. Impossible. So we've seen a few of these already. So instead of making a nice open ah sound, I said impossible with a different sound that does exist in English. So it's not impossible, it's impossible. All right, you guys, the last section. Here we go. You are over scrupulous, surely. I dare say Mr. Bingley will be very glad to see you, and I will send a few lines by you to assure him of my hearty consent to his marrying whichever he chooses of the girls, though I must throw in a good word for my little Lizzie. All right, you guys, how many mistakes in this section? 4. So the first word that I said incorrectly was the word over. So instead of making an O sound there, I made it an ah sound. So I said over, but it's pronounced over. The next mistake that I made was on the word very. So this one, if you come from a language in which V and W both exist, I'm sure you caught this really quickly, but a lot of my clients come from languages in which there is no distinction between V and W, and for these folks, this can be a really, really tricky one. So instead of very, I said wary. The next mistake that I made was on the word consent. Consent. So as you can hear, it's schwa, winner, consent. However, I flipped that, so I said consent. And then the last mistake that I made was on the word good. So good has a lax vowel there, and instead of making that sound, I made the sound oo. So instead of good, I said good. All right, you guys, if you are still with me and if you actually did this whole exercise, then you should be very, very proud of yourself. And I'm sure you're a little bit tired, or at least your auditory perceptual system should be a little bit tired because this is very hard work. In fact, it was even hard for me to record while thinking about reading fluently while trying to sneak in all these little errors. So if you did the exercise, amazing, amazing job. Let me know how you guys did in the comments below. I'll be really curious to hear it. And if you guys found this video helpful, I have a whole playlist called American Accent Tests with similar kind of stuff. And again, they're all designed to improve your auditory perceptual system really at the level of your brain, so that you're not just spending your time acquiring more fun knowledge, but actually changing your brain so that you can speak American English like a native speaker if that's your goal. All right, you guys, well, that's it for today. If you liked this video, please give it a like, please share it. I really appreciate these things because it really helps my channel a lot. And take good care. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye.